Okay, now that we have the web server installed and the HTTP listener, secure HTTP listener set up, we're going to install the load balancer plugin. So the first thing we have to do is export the GlassFish Domain Administration Server certificate. Basically, we're going to use that as part of the load balancer installer plugin. This will help enable, basically, using a client certificate, trusted communication between the DAS and the HTTP listener. And then we're going to install the load balancer plugin. Okay, here we are back at our command line. And what I've done is I've created a script called export-cert.sh. I've done this so I can spell out the command line options. So the first thing we're going to do is use the Java keytool command to export the DAS certificate. It's going to export using basically with a -RFC option, a nice readable format versus a binary encoding. The alias of the certificate that's stored in the key store is S1AS. The key store that we're going to export from is defined in the domain's config directory /keystore.jks. And the file that we're going to export this to is s1as.rfc. So let's go ahead and run this. Port cert.sh. And that's what I thought. Had to change the permissions to make it executable. And now let's run the command. And the default password for the keystore, the keystore.jks file, is change it. And there we go. So the next step is to actually uncompress the load balancer configurator file that we downloaded. Unzip GlassFish LB *zip. Here we go. Let's unzip that. And what you'll see is a simple jar file. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to the VirtualBox image so that you can see a nice GUI installer. Okay, here we are back at our VirtualBox image, and let's take a look at the jar file that we just uncompressed. And now we'll actually run the jar file. This launches the GUI for the GlassFish Load Balancer installer, and we're going to click Next. The installer is basically a single installer that supports all platforms and all web servers, but since this is Linux, only these two options apply: the Oracle iPlanet web server and the Apache HTTP server, which also includes the Oracle HTTP server. Okay, so now we have to pick the instance that's actually going to be running the plugin. So we're going to go to Web Server 7 and select the HTTPS-GlassFish web server instance. This is the iPlanet Web Server 7. So the admin username is admin. Admin is the password. The host is GlassFish. And the port is 8989. This is the port of the administration server. The username, the host name and the port. Now this is the DAS certificate file that we exported in a prior step. So we actually want to load this up. And this is the file that we saved before, so this is the certificate file. Okay, let's hit the next step here. And this is going to actually do the install. This is unpacking. After the unpack step, it's actually going to install the plugin, which basically copies it to the instance's config directory. And it has been successfully installed. Next. This is just describing how we can actually do some post-installation steps that I'll talk about a little bit later. And this is kind of an important button here. This button basically says that you can generate a template file or a script that can actually be used to install subsequent installations of the plugin in silent mode, so it won't have to use the GUI. Currently, you have to use the GUI the first time to actually install the plugin. Okay, and I'll click Done. Now that we've installed the Load Balancer plugin, we'll have to actually start the web server instance. And after we start the instance, we will create a load balancer configuration using the domain administration server, the GlassFish domain administration server. And after we create the load balancer configuration, we'll actually apply that configuration. And what applying the configuration means is that it'll actually generate a load balancer.xml file, and it'll push it over the network using the secure HTTPS port that we created in the web server instance. So we have a nice, secure, trusted channel to actually push out load balancer configurations. If we hadn't gone through the trouble of creating the secure HTTP listener and exporting, the DAS certificate, what we would have to do is actually manually copy the XML file. So we would export it to a file and then use SFTP or FTP and copy it over to the config directory of the instance. By having a secure communication channel, we can just use the apply command to do this automatically. Okay, now we're going to actually start the instance that we installed the load balancer plugin into. And you'll notice the instance is https-glassfish, and it is currently not running. So let's go ahead and start it. Start. And the instance is now starting, or started. Okay, the next step is to create a load balancer configuration. And we're going to use the asadmin command line to do that. Asadmin create http load balancer --device host. This is the host name where the secure HTTP listener is actually running. That's GlassFish. And the port number that the secure HTTP listener is actually listening on, 8082 in our case. And we want to target this load balancer at cluster 1. And the name of this load balancer configuration is going to be cluster 1 LB. Okay, now that we've created the load balancer config, we're actually going to apply it. So now we're going to say asadmin apply http lb changes and the name of the cluster load balancer that we just created. Okay, so we've actually successfully pushed out a load balancer configuration. And to test it out, what we'll do is create a new tab and try and go to GlassFish :8081. And that points to the web server instance. We don't have any applications deployed yet. That's going to be the next step.